Before Mark Reynolds' world turned upside down, everything had seemed deceptively ordinary. Just a few months earlier, he and Linda had celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary at their go-to Italian restaurant, clinking glasses in honor of the life they'd built together. Over dinner, they reminisced about the challenges they had faced, job losses, parenting hurdles, financial struggles, each hardship strengthening the bond they believed was unshakable. Mark had always thought their marriage was solid. Looking back, though, he could now see the warning signs, subtle, almost imperceptible cracks that hinted at something deeper. Linda had grown distant, her phone seemingly glued to her hand, responding to messages with a small, secretive smile that wasn't meant for him. The easy laughter they once shared had dwindled, replaced by polite but empty conversations. Still, Mark, ever the optimist, dismissed the uneasy feeling creeping into his gut. It wasn't until late September that the disconnect became impossible to ignore. Linda's shifts at Home Depot became erratic, filled with sudden manager meetings that stretched late into the night. At first, he reasoned it away. Corporate shakeups were common, and Linda had always been committed to her job. But then came the little things, the way she dashed to the bathroom to freshen up before heading out, the unfamiliar perfume lingering on her clothes, the unexplained withdrawals from their shared bank account. Even their daughter, Sophie, seemed unsettled. She dodged his questions about school and spent more time away from home. Mark assumed it was just the stress of senior year, another phase to be weathered. He was willing to justify anything as long as it meant keeping the peace. Then came Labor Day weekend. Hoping to reconnect, Mark took the family to his brother's lake house in upstate Pennsylvania for a quiet getaway. But Linda had been distant, constantly checking her phone, slipping away to take hushed calls. Sophie, too, was quieter than usual, as though carrying a secret she wasn't ready to share. When Mark finally asked what was wrong, Linda snapped at him, an uncharacteristic outburst from a woman who was usually composed. "Nothing's wrong, Mark. Stop overanalyzing everything." He let it slide, pushing his growing suspicions aside. But no matter how hard he tried, the unease refused to fade. Then came the night in mid-October. Waking at 2 a.m. to an empty bed, Mark wandered downstairs to find Linda curled up on the couch, whispering into her phone, her voice tinged with an excitement he hadn't heard in years. The moment she noticed him, she hastily ended the call, fumbling through a weak excuse about a work emergency. Mark didn't buy it. That was the moment he knew something was seriously wrong. He just had no idea how bad it would get. That morning, Mark woke up exhausted, dreading a conversation he knew he couldn't avoid. The previous evening, he had caught Sophie's boyfriend kissing one of her so-called friends at the mall. If they had just been talking, he might have let it go, but the way they acted left no doubt it was more than innocent. Mark knew the truth would crush Sophie. Keeping it from her wasn't an option, but timing mattered. With a crucial volleyball semifinal that afternoon, he didn't want to throw her off her game. He decided to wait until after the match, maybe tell her on the drive home. But by midday, Mark's life took an unexpected turn. His boss called him into the office, introducing him to a man he had never seen before, a stocky, middle-aged guy with a firm handshake. "Mark," his boss said, "we just finalized the acquisition of Precision Buffers in Daytona Beach. This is Greg Sanders, the former owner. Starting next year, we want you to take over as head of the maintenance team. I know you've been frustrated with your career growth, but congratulations, you just got promoted." Mark blinked, struggling to process the news. His boss continued, "Between Thanksgiving and New Year's, you'll shadow Greg, get familiar with the team, and settle in. You already know the equipment inside out, so the transition should be smooth. Only catch, you'll have to relocate to Daytona Beach." Before Mark could even respond, his boss added, "Oh, and by the way, the acquisition deal included a 2-bedroom apartment, rent-free for a year. Plus, you're getting a 25% salary bump. How long do you need to think it over?" Mark didn't hesitate. "I'm in." Pennsylvania winters had always been brutal on Linda, and she'd been terrified he might get transferred somewhere even colder, like Michigan. This was a move she would actually welcome. His boss grinned. "Great. Take my car, drop Greg at the airport, and take the rest of the day off." As Mark watched Greg disappear into the terminal, a rare feeling of relief washed over him. For the first time in a long time, things seemed to be falling into place. Sophie would get a fresh start in Daytona, a clean break from her toxic relationship. And for Mark, maybe this was exactly the change he needed. But fate had other plans. On the drive home, his thoughts were interrupted by a flash of red. A car parked in front of a Best Western near the airport. Linda's red Camry. Normally, he wouldn't have thought twice about it. But just last week, someone had backed into her car at work, leaving the front grille damaged and the radiator exposed. And the car in that lot had the exact same damage. His stomach clenched. Pulling into the lot, he parked beside it, staring at the familiar vehicle. His mind raced. What possible reason could Linda have for being at a motel in the middle of the day? Mark had never been the kind of man to jump to conclusions. But this didn't sit right. One thing worked in his favor. Linda wouldn't recognize the car he was driving. The dark-tinted windows gave him just enough cover. He could wait, watch, see who she was with. But just waiting wasn't enough. He needed a plan. Then it hit him. Linda's spare tire was still sitting in the garage. He'd fixed it days ago, but hadn't gotten around to putting it back in her trunk. If she walked out to a flat, she'd have no choice but to call him. Perfect. Mark pulled a jackknife from his pocket, slipped out of the car, and quietly punctured the valve stem on Linda's rear tire. Within seconds, it deflated completely. He eased back into his seat, eyes locked on the motel entrance, waiting. About 30 minutes later, he heard her voice. "Damn it. What now?" "No worries, beautiful," a man answered, his tone smooth, almost amused. Mark's chest tightened. "I don't have a spare," Linda admitted. Mark left it in the garage. "What an idiot," the man scoffed. "I always make sure my wife's car is taken care of. Now I'm wishing I'd stayed home instead of coming with you." "So what do we do?" Linda asked. "Let's head back inside and figure it out," he suggested. Mark waited for the inevitable call from Linda. It never came. Instead, a familiar car pulled into the lot. His stomach sank further. Sophie. Mark watched as she parked her Honda Civic, stepped out, and walked up to a motel door. After a brief exchange with someone inside, she returned to her car, opened the trunk, and pulled out a spare tire, setting it beside Linda's Camry. Then, Linda and her companion finally emerged. "Tony, take care of this. Sophie has a game tonight," Linda instructed. Sophie didn't bother hiding her disgust. "If you really cared about me, you'd have been ready when I got here," she shot back. "I need to get to school. You deal with it." Tony chuckled, unbothered. "No problem, ma'am. I'll be at your game, cheering you on." Sophie crossed her arms. "Sit somewhere far from Mom. Dad's coming, and I don't want any drama." Tony smirked. "Your dad won't figure it out. And even if he did, he wouldn't do a damn thing. He knows better." Mark's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Tony, stop," Linda snapped. "Mark is my husband and Sophie's father. Show some respect." Sophie glared at her mother. "Respect? You think sneaking around in motel rooms is respectful?" Linda sighed. "I just want you to graduate before your father does something drastic." "There won't be a divorce," Linda added quickly. Sophie scoffed. "You're delusional. Dad won't let this slide. And Tony? He's not worth it." Linda shrugged. "I deserve a little fun after everything I've sacrificed for this marriage." Sophie's expression hardened. "Dad sacrificed just as much, probably more. And at least he's faithful." Linda let out a bitter laugh. "Your father? Please. He was so shy he couldn't even ask me out for weeks. He'd never cheat." Sophie shook her head. "He's good because he's loyal. Unlike Tony." Linda's patience snapped. "That's enough. Go get ready for your game." Sophie rolled her eyes as she climbed into her car. "Keep Tony away from Dad. He might surprise you." With that, she drove off, leaving Linda and Tony to deal with the flat. Tony sighed. "She's not exactly happy for us." Linda exhaled slowly. "No daughter would be. But she won't say anything. Telling Mark would ruin everything." Mark sat frozen in the company car, staring blankly at the dashboard. Discovering Linda's affair was one thing. Realizing Sophie knew about it and tolerated it hit even harder. Shaking off the numbness, he remembered her volleyball match. He'd never missed a game. But today, he couldn't bring himself to go. Instead, he picked up his truck and drove home, wanting nothing more than to avoid Linda and Sophie. His appetite was gone. His energy drained. Cracking open a few beers, he tried to process everything. Just this morning, life had seemed stable. Now, it was crumbling around him. Would Linda still want to move to Daytona now that Tony was in the picture? The more he thought about it, the more bitter he felt. He had always been faithful. He had worked tirelessly to provide for their family. And this was his reward? Everything that had felt warm and familiar between them since Labor Day now seemed like a carefully constructed cover-up. Then, it dawned on him. Linda didn't know about his transfer to Florida. If he told her he was relocating, she'd assume it was to Michigan. And she definitely wouldn't want to move there, not right before Thanksgiving. He had an idea. He could go to Daytona alone, settle into the apartment, and put some distance between himself and this disaster. It wasn't revenge, but it was a start. By Thanksgiving, Linda and Sophie would believe he was heading north. Instead, he'd be on his way south. For the first time all day, the thought gave him a little relief. That night, after downing a couple more beers and taking a Dramamine, Mark settled into the guest room. He just needed to shut his brain off for a while. Later that evening, Sophie pulled into the driveway, spotting Mark's truck. "Weird. Dad never misses my games," she muttered. Linda frowned when she stepped inside and saw the empty beer cans. "That's not like Mark," she said, concern creeping into her voice. She searched the house until she found him, passed out in the guest room. Sophie whispered, "I think he's drunk. Why would he miss my game?" Linda sighed. "Let's not make this worse. Maybe he's coming down with something." Then she added, "Tony thinks you have real scholarship potential." Sophie's face darkened. "I don't care what Tony thinks. He's an idiot." The next morning, Mark left early, stopping at an IHOP for breakfast. His phone buzzed. "Linda. Mark, are you okay? You missed Sophie's game, slept in the guest room, and left early. What's going on?" He answered flatly, "Just trying to be spontaneous." Then he hung up and turned his phone off. At work, he quietly packed up his tools and belongings. He couldn't undo the past, but he could control what came next. Florida was his fresh start. When he got home that evening, Linda was waiting for him, arms crossed. "Don't hang up on me again," she snapped. "You skipped Sophie's game, got drunk, passed out, and then snuck out. Now you want dinner? Forget it." Mark, now numb to her words, simply nodded and walked past her. He spent the evening at a sports bar, savoring the solitude. He ate ribs, drank beer, and lost himself in football talk with strangers. By the time he got home, it was almost 11. Linda and Sophie were curled up on the couch watching a movie. Linda glanced at him with narrowed eyes. "So you decided to show up?" Then she smirked. "Don't expect to sleep in my bed until you apologize." Mark didn't bother responding. He simply grabbed what he needed for the next day, walked straight to the guest room, and shut the door. As Mark left the room, Sophie watched him go. "Maybe he likes the guest room." Linda smirked. "He won't last 2 nights before crawling back." Sophie kept her eyes on the floor. "Or maybe he knows when he's had enough. I just hope he never finds out about Tony." Linda's expression darkened. "Stop bringing him up. This stays between us." When Sophie first discovered her mother's affair, Linda thought it might make things easier, one less person to deceive. At first, Sophie agreed to keep quiet to avoid a messy divorce. But as time passed, her defiance grew, making it harder for Linda to juggle being a mother and maintaining her secret. Mark, however, was the real mystery. He hadn't confronted her, hadn't shown anger, just an eerie silence that unsettled her more than shouting ever could. But she was sure of one thing: he would come around. Their history, their chemistry, it was too strong for him to stay distant forever. By Sunday morning, Mark was moving like a man with one foot out the door. He had breakfast at IHOP, then took a long walk through the park, letting the crisp air clear his head. The thought of Florida's warmth made him feel lighter. Back home before noon, he grabbed a six-pack, turned on the TV, and settled in for the Eagles game. Linda ignored him at first, but by the second quarter, she slammed a cupboard shut, grabbed her keys, and stormed out. Mark didn't react. When dinner never appeared, he grabbed his keys and left for his favorite sports bar, where he could enjoy ribs and football without Linda's presence looming over him. The Eagles had beaten the Giants, and for the first time in days, he felt a sense of normalcy. Back home, Sophie eyed her mother. "Dad never misses a Sunday game at home. Did you two fight?" Linda exhaled. "We barely spoke. I told him he needed to apologize for missing your game and drinking too much before he could come back to bed. He'll come around." But when Mark returned home, he didn't even acknowledge them. He walked straight to the guest room and shut the door. The next few days were thick with tension. Mark remained distant, showing no signs of softening. Then, on Tuesday, Linda met Tony at the motel again, only to find yet another flat tire. 2 flats in the same place? That wasn't a coincidence. "We're never coming here again," she muttered. Tony quickly changed it. Luckily, she had repaired the spare. But the unease stayed with her. Meanwhile, Mark was making quiet progress on his plans. By Tuesday morning, all his tools and belongings were packed in his truck. His closet still looked full, but he knew Linda wouldn't notice what was missing. Wonder if she'll realize I didn't pack a single winter coat, he mused. Each afternoon, he parked outside Home Depot, watching Linda leave work. Same routine. Work, grocery store, then home. Satisfied, he grabbed dinner and watched Monday Night Football at the bar. That evening, Sophie studied her mother. Dad's not coming home again? Linda sighed. He's not talking to me. I don't know what's going on. Sophie frowned. Maybe he figured it out. You won't cook for him, won't let him sleep with you, but rush off whenever Tony calls. Looks like Dad's the one in control now. Linda stiffened. At least Tony treats me with respect. Sophie scoffed. Of course he does. He's getting everything he wants. But does he take out the trash? Pay the bills? No. Dad does all that while Tony reaps the benefits. Linda's patience snapped. Watch your tone. Sophie held her ground. Dad deserves loyalty. He's not getting it. That night, she found Mark. Our championship game is tomorrow. Will you come? I'll check my schedule, he replied, not looking up. The next evening, Sophie came home in tears. His truck's here. He could have come. Why is he mad at me? Linda hugged her. Let's find out. They searched the house and found Mark in the guest room, asleep, empty beer cans beside him. Tomorrow's Thanksgiving. Will you let Dad eat with us? Sophie asked. Of course, Linda said. This is his home. I just hope he behaves. Sophie hesitated. Who else is coming? Linda smirked. Tony and his wife. Sophie's jaw clenched. This won't end well. Linda simply shrugged. We'll see. You might be surprised. Thanksgiving morning, Mark woke early, stopping at a diner before heading home. By the time he walked through the door, the house smelled of turkey, stuffing, and pies. Linda barely looked up. We're eating at noon. Want a drink? Mark ignored her and went to the living room, flipping on the TV. She was trying to act as if everything was normal. He wasn't interested in playing along. When family arrived, he greeted them warmly. No matter what was happening between him and Linda, their parents had always treated him well. As dishes were passed around the table, Mark cleared his throat. I have an announcement. I'm being transferred. I leave tomorrow. It'll be through the spring, maybe longer. Linda's expression froze. Why didn't he tell me sooner? Her mother looked surprised. That's unexpected. Linda never mentioned it. Linda forced a neutral expression. Are you going alone? Or will you wait to see if it's permanent? Mark didn't hesitate. I'll go alone. Sophie needs to finish school, and Linda has her job. I'll be fine. The conversation shifted to Michigan winters, but Linda barely heard a word. Something about this didn't feel right. Linda and Sophie exchanged a look, both coming to the same realization. Mark wasn't just angry. He was upset about leaving. That explained his mood, the distance, the silence. After dinner, he sat with his dad and Linda's father to watch the second half of the Eagles game. The Cowboys were dominating, and frustration hung thick in the air. Then, the doorbell rang. Linda's voice broke through the tense silence. Hey, everyone. I'd like you to meet some friends. Mark barely looked up until he heard the names. This is Rachel and her husband, Tony. The moment Tony walked in, Mark felt his pulse spike. Tony, grinning like he owned the place, wore a Dallas Cowboys sweater, Romo's name bold on the back. Smug as ever, he extended a hand. Hey, Mark me. I've heard a lot about you. Mark barely heard the words. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the blatant disrespect. The rivalry jersey, the arrogance. The fact that he had the audacity to stand there in Mark's house like he belonged. Without thinking, Mark kicked Tony hard in the groin. Tony gasped, crumpling forward. Before anyone could react, Mark drove his knee into Tony's face, the sickening crack of a broken nose ringing through the stunned silence. Rachel screamed, rushing to Tony. Linda bolted to the bathroom, retching. Sophie, eyes wide, grabbed ice, but the damage was done. Mark stood there, his breathing heavy, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes in the room. Without a word, he grabbed his coat and walked out. He didn't stop until he hit the highway, driving south until he reached Hillsville, Virginia, where he checked into a motel and collapsed into bed. The next morning, Mark's phone was filled with missed calls and voicemails. One from his mom, another from Linda, one from Sophie. all demanding answers. He deleted them without listening. As he continued down Highway 77, his mind replayed last night's events. Tony had deserved it, no doubt about that. But what now? Would the police be after him? Would he lose his job? Would Linda divorce him? Eventually, he decided he needed to hear at least some of the messages to know where things stood. He left his phone on but ignored incoming calls, waiting for voicemails instead. Less than 30 minutes later, Linda called again. He let it go to voicemail and then listened. "Mark, please call me. I know you're upset about the transfer, but you need to calm down. Tony will be fine. He needs surgery for his nose, but he's not pressing charges. Just call me." Mark let out a breath. No cops. No legal trouble. That was something. By late afternoon, he reached his new apartment, retrieved the key from the lockbox, and let himself in. By 7 p.m., he'd unpacked, parked his truck in the garage, and gone to bed. The next 2 days, he busied himself fixing small issues around the apartment, but worry crept in. Would Linda track him down? Would she try to follow him? By Saturday, he decided to take control. He called her. "Where the hell are you?" Linda snapped the moment she picked up. "We called all night. Tony has a broken nose and a concussion. Are you insane?" Mark hung up mid-rant, turned off his phone, and grabbed a notepad to make a shopping list. An hour later, he returned with a new lock, air filter, cleaning supplies, and a 30-pack of beer. At noon, he called Sophie. "Hey, Dad," she answered, relief in her voice. "Glad you called. Things went nuts after you knocked out Tony. The ambulance took him to the hospital, and both sets of grandparents thought you'd lost it. Mom was panicking about a lawsuit. I had to clean the blood off the floor while she freaked out at the hospital. I think she apologized 100 times. Anything else happen?" Mark asked, keeping his tone casual. "Not much." "Oh, Mom's furious you hung up on her again. She's still ranting about it." Mark chuckled. "Yeah, I could tell. That's why I called. I start my new job Monday. If anyone asks where I am, like the cops, don't worry." Sophie laughed. "You're safe. Tony's not pressing charges, though his wife probably wanted to. But seriously, why keep the transfer a secret? Is that why you've been acting weird?" Mark exhaled. "The transfer made me rethink things. I realized that if I don't respect myself, no one else will. I've lost my way, but I'm finding it again." Sophie hesitated. "Are you okay, Dad? No health issues, right?" "I'm fine. You and your mom know what my problems are," he said quietly. "Just tell her I'm settled. No need to worry." "Okay, Dad. I'll call you sometimes. Will you answer?" Mark hesitated. The betrayal still stung. Sophie had known. She had stayed silent. But she was still his daughter, and cutting her off completely wasn't an option. "If you call when I'm not at work, I'll pick up." Sophie's voice softened. "What about Mom? Will you talk to her?" Mark's tone grew guarded. "If she just wants to yell, don't bother. But if it's about the house or family, she can call. That's fair, right?" Sophie nodded on the other end. "That's fair. Good luck with the new job." "Is it cold there?" she asked after a pause. "Actually, the weather's better than I expected," Mark said. "I'll be fine. Bye, Em." As soon as Sophie hung up, Linda pounced. "What did he say? Did he apologize? Is he avoiding coming home? Did he mention me?" Sophie sighed. "He's not scared, Mom. He said if he doesn't respect himself, no one else will. That's why he took down Tony. That's why he keeps hanging up on you. If you want to talk to him, you'll have to show more respect." Linda scoffed. "Respect? He attacked a guest over a t-shirt. I'll give him a piece of my mind next time I talk to him." Sophie crossed her arms. "That's exactly what he means. If you keep acting like that, he'll just hang up again. Tony's the only one getting anything from you, unless you're planning to pick up a few more boyfriends," Sophie muttered. Linda's patience snapped. "Why are you being so nasty?" "Because you're rude and disrespectful," Sophie shot back. "Tony acted like an idiot, and Dad put him in his place. No one should walk into someone else's home and mock them, especially not their wife's lover." Linda stiffened. "He doesn't know about Tony." Sophie scoffed. "He didn't need to. Tony walked in like he owned the place, and Dad reacted. Any man would have done the same." "I'm done listening to this," Linda yelled. "You live in my house, and you'll respect me, whether you think I deserve it or not." Meanwhile, Mark was lounging by the pool Wednesday evening when his phone rang. Seeing Linda's name, he let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, he listened to her message. "Mark, I know you're screening my calls. Please call me back. We need to figure out what to do with the house. Who's handling the snow removal? Should we sign a fuel contract? Which company do we use? Call me." She sounded calm, which was rare lately. He debated ignoring her, but practical matters needed attention. When he called back, Linda answered immediately. "Thanks for calling," she said, sounding relieved. "I just don't know what to do about the things you usually handle. With winter coming, can you at least tell me what I need to take care of?" "I'll email you a list," Mark promised. "I should have done that sooner." "Are you coming home for Christmas?" Linda asked. "Mom and Dad want us there for dinner. Your parents expect to see us on Christmas Eve. They keep asking if I've heard from you. It's awkward when I say no." "I'm not sure yet," Mark said. "I'll try if I can. But you can tell them I'm not coming back just to be treated like the bad guy. Every voicemail, even from my mom, is full of guilt trips and threats. I don't need that." Linda sighed. "I'll tell them, but I doubt it'll change anything. They're still furious about how you treated Tony and the way you disappeared after." "Then why should I come back at all?" Mark shot back. "I'm not sitting through Christmas dinner while your parents or mine treat me like I'm the villain. If they want me there because they care, fine. But if it's just to lecture me, forget it." Linda's voice softened. "You can still come home. Sophie and I would love to see you. I promise we won't say anything stupid." Mark hesitated. The thought of Linda with Tony had erased any lingering affection, but he measured his words carefully. "I used to enjoy being with you," he said, deliberately leaving out the part where he hadn't known she was cheating. "Me too," Linda sobbed. "You're the best lover I've ever had. I miss you. Please come home for Christmas. Stay the whole week." Mark didn't react to her words. He knew exactly what she was doing. "I'll try," he said. "They don't like giving time off during the holidays, but I'll let you know. I'll also email you the list of things you need to handle." Linda hung up, looking hopeful. Sophie, who had overheard, smirked. "Best lover in the world, huh? Hope Tony didn't hear that. He probably thinks he's number one. And maybe his wife does too." Linda glared. "I told you to stop talking about Tony like that. Your father is better than Tony." "That wasn't a lie." Sophie snorted. "Oh yeah, Dad will love hearing that. My wife thinks I'm better than her other lovers." "That's really something to be proud of." Linda turned away, tears in her eyes. She left without another word. Sophie just shook her head. Meanwhile, Mark was settling into his new life. Afternoons by the pool had left him with a tan, and he felt lighter, more at ease than he had in years. The plant's equipment was familiar, and his job was going well. The biggest surprise? The number of single, divorced, and widowed women in his condo complex. Once word spread that he was good with tools, he became the go-to guy for household repairs. In return, they left him homemade baked goods, bottles of wine, or home-cooked meals at his door. He didn't mind. A few days before Christmas, Linda ramped up the pressure, pushing him to finalize his holiday plans. That night, after fixing a leaky pipe at Mrs. Lawson's condo, Mark turned to find her standing in nothing but a smile. "Thanks for your help," she said, stepping closer. "I don't have much money, but I have other ways to show appreciation. Want to help?" Mark hesitated. He had never cheated on Linda, not once in their marriage. But Deborah Lawson, with her long legs and toned curves, was hard to ignore. "Deborah, I need to figure out where my marriage stands," Mark said, stepping back. "After Christmas, I'll know. I've never cheated on my wife. But if things don't work out, maybe." Deborah gave him a knowing smile, slipping on her robe. "That idiot wife of yours doesn't know what she had," she said, running a finger down his arm. "But don't worry. I'm not the only one around here interested. You've got plenty of admirers." Mark only smiled, shaking his head as he left. That evening, he called Linda and told her he'd try to be home by Christmas Eve. Her excitement surprised him. He packed up and left 3 days before Christmas, planning to drive halfway the first day, shop the second, and arrive home just in time. If things got tense, he could always leave. By 9 p.m. Christmas Eve, he pulled into the driveway and immediately noticed the cars parked outside. Linda was hosting her usual holiday party for her Home Depot coworkers. As he approached the house, he glanced through the kitchen window and froze. "Tony." Mark's jaw tightened. He had no interest in making a scene. Not tonight. Quietly, he walked around to the basement door, slipping inside unnoticed. The couch he had salvaged years ago still sat against the wall, and he lay down, figuring he'd stay out of sight until Tony left. But after nearly 2 hours, he woke up to silence. He listened closely. Upstairs, the house was quiet. Mark sat up, waiting. Something felt off. Curious, Mark stepped outside to see if the guests had left. Most of the cars were gone, except for one unfamiliar sedan still sitting in the driveway. He moved carefully to the front of the house, peeking through the kitchen window. His stomach tightened. There was Linda, her hands on Tony's chest, his lips pressed against hers. Mark's fists clenched as rage shot through him. He wanted nothing more than to storm inside and knock Tony out cold again. But he forced himself to breathe. I got away with it once. I won't be that lucky again. A new plan formed in his mind. He would catch them in the act, snap a few photos, and confront Linda before heading back to Florida. He needed proof that would ensure she couldn't twist the story. But things didn't go as planned. Mark crept upstairs, slipping into the guest room. He turned off the lights, cracked the door open, and waited. 20 minutes later, Linda came up and entered the master bedroom. Moments later, the sound of running water filled the hall. She's cleaning up for him, Mark thought bitterly. Then an idea struck him. Moving silently, he stepped into the hallway and flicked off the lamp in the master bedroom before retreating to his hiding spot. A few minutes later, Tony made his way upstairs. When he reached the third step from the top, Mark acted. With precise timing, he stepped out and kicked Tony square in the jaw. Tony's body flew backward. He crashed down the stairs, limbs flailing, before hitting the hardwood floor with a sickening thud. Mark stood frozen. Tony lay motionless at the bottom of the staircase. The shower upstairs still ran. Linda hadn't heard a thing. Then reality hit him like a freight train. If Tony dies, I'm screwed. Panic set in. Without another thought, Mark bolted down the stairs, stepped over Tony's body, and left the house. 2 hours later, he was 100 miles away, putting as much distance between himself and the disaster he had left behind. Near dawn, he pulled into a rundown motel, paid in cash, and collapsed onto the bed. Sleep didn't come easy. His mind kept replaying the night, Tony tumbling down the stairs, the dull thud of his body hitting the floor. By morning, the weight of what he had done fully sank in. This could get serious. If Tony doesn't make it, he shook off the thought. He knew one thing for sure. Staying near Linda and Tony would only lead to trouble. He had to move on. Yet, despite everything, a hollow ache settled in his chest. He missed Sophie. He even missed Linda, though he wasn't sure why anymore. Around noon, his phone rang. Seeing his parents' number, he hesitated before letting it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, he finally listened to the message. Mark, it's your dad. Call us when you get this. There's been some trouble at your house. Linda and Sophie are fine, but you need to hear what happened. Mark's pulse quickened as he dialed back. Hey, Dad. I just got your message. What's going on? His father's voice was serious. Tony showed up at your house again last night. He fell down the stairs, badly. Broken jaw, arm, ribs, and a concussion. Mark said nothing, his heart hammering. But here's the twist, his father continued. His wife found out where he was. She thought he was working late. She showed up just as the paramedics were loading him into the ambulance. She was livid. She slapped Linda, called her every name in the book, and even tried to throw Tony off the stretcher before the cops stopped her. Mark let out a breath. Holy shit. His father chuckled dryly. This whole thing takes me back to Thanksgiving when you kicked him. We thought it was about a Cowboys jersey. Now we get it. Your mom and I owe you an apology. We should have trusted that you had a reason. Honestly, you showed more restraint than I would have. Mark rubbed a hand over his face, still processing. Thanks, Dad. Sophie wasn't home when it happened, his father added. She was at a friend's house. We talked to her this morning. She finally admitted she knew about Linda and Tony all along. Said she was trying to keep the family together until she graduated. Mark swallowed hard. We told her she betrayed you just like Linda did, his father said. There were a lot of tears, but in the end, we hugged it out. She understands now. Mark exhaled. Thanks for talking to her, Dad. I appreciate it. His father hesitated before asking, Where are you really, son? You told us Michigan, but I don't buy it. Moving there in December seems a bit extreme. Mark chuckled, some of the tension easing. I'm not in Michigan, Dad. The company bought a plant in Daytona Beach. I got promoted, a raise, and they gave me an apartment. I'm the maintenance supervisor now. His father let out a low whistle. Florida? Well, damn, that's great. Mind if we visit in February? We'll be sick of the cold by then. Of course, Dad. You're welcome anytime. Just don't tell Linda where I am. I'm not ready to deal with her yet. Don't worry, son. We're done with her too, his father assured him. But you should talk to Sophie. She thinks you've been distant because you knew about Linda's affair. Mark sighed. Yeah, I'll call her soon. Good, his father said. We love you, son. Love you too, Dad. That evening, Mark returned to his apartment. His first Christmas alone. The weight of it hit him hard. He cracked open a beer, sat on the couch, and stared at the TV without really watching. Then, a knock at the door. Mark opened it to find Deborah Lawson, the widow from his complex, smiling warmly. I saw your light on and wanted to wish you a Merry Christmas, she said softly. It's tough being alone this time of year. Mark smirked. Yeah, I'm figuring that out. Her gaze flickered over him, gentle and knowing. And since you're back, I'm guessing things with your wife aren't exactly resolved? That's a safe bet. Deborah's smile widened as she stepped inside. Mark stretched out on the couch, relaxing as Deborah leaned against him. So, your wife invited her boyfriend into your home, huh? She mused. Sounds like he made himself comfortable. Too comfortable, Mark muttered. I hate crowds, unless it's just me and a couple of women. Deborah smirked. What about just one woman? Mark hesitated, then grinned. I might have to adjust, but I doubt I'd mind. You might have to move a little slower with me, though, he admitted. It's been a while. If I were any good, my wife wouldn't have strayed. Deborah shook her head, stepping closer. I doubt you were the problem. A guy as kind as you? I'm sure you're amazing in the bedroom. Mark chuckled. Do you have? He paused, realizing just how long it had been. You know, rubbers? Deborah laughed. Haven't needed those in 20 years. Mark smirked. Guess I've got some learning to do. She slid her hands up his chest, eyes twinkling. And I'm happy to teach you. That's how Mark spent Christmas Eve, trading years of frustration and hurt for something new. The pain of betrayal hadn't disappeared, but for the first time, it wasn't all he felt. Deborah slipped out before dawn, not wanting to fuel neighborhood gossip, but she promised to meet him at the pool later. That evening, after another home-cooked meal and round of lovemaking, Mark returned to his apartment by 9 to keep things discreet. A few neighbors had noticed, but he didn't care. Shortly after he got home, his phone rang. Dad, you didn't come home for Christmas, but I don't blame you, Sophie said, her voice heavy with emotion. Mom's a wreck, and I feel awful too. I'm sorry for everything we did to you. I knew it was wrong, but I was selfish. I just wanted you to stay until I graduated. Mark exhaled slowly. It's in the past, he said, though the hurt lingered. But yeah, you both hurt me. I never thought your mom was that unhappy, and I definitely never thought you'd help her hide it. The weird thing is, she wasn't unhappy, Sophie whispered. She always said you were a great husband, father, even lover. She just wanted something else. And now she regrets it. Mark shook his head. Did you know about Tony when she invited him over for Thanksgiving? Sophie hesitated. Yes. Mark clenched his jaw. I should have apologized for losing my temper, but when Tony smirked at me, I lost control. I couldn't stand the way they treated me. I get it, Sophie admitted. Mom tried to say it was just about the Cowboys shirt, but I knew better. Did you think I missed your last 2 games because I was mad at you? Mark asked. Sophie was silent for a moment. Yeah, I was, Mark confessed. But the real reason? When I heard Tony say he'd be cheering for you, I knew I couldn't be there. Otherwise, I'd probably be in jail right now. Sophie sighed. Were you there when I brought Mom the spare tire at the motel? You cut the valve stem, didn't you? You wanted her to call you so you could confront her, and I walked right into it. Yeah. I'm so sorry, Dad. I was selfish and stupid. Don't blame yourself, Mark said. I should have confronted her then. But honestly, I had too much anger. I don't think I could have controlled myself. Sophie's voice softened. You'd never hurt a woman, Dad. Especially not Mom. Tony, though. Mark smirked. Yeah, Tony's different. Did Grandpa tell you about Tony? She asked. He fell down the stairs last night. He's got a broken jaw, busted ribs, and a concussion. He'll recover, though. Mark hummed. Good to know. Sophie changed the subject. Oh, by the way, I found the new laptop you left me for Thanksgiving. It was still in the basement. Thanks. I'll use it a lot for college. Mark smiled, surprised he had forgotten. I'm glad you like it. Did you find the one for your mom? Yeah. She cried when she saw the pearls. She felt awful about everything. Mark's heart clenched. I didn't even remember those gifts. I left them before everything went south. Thanks for being such a great dad, Sophie said. I'm finally realizing how much you did for us. Mark chuckled. When I was your age, I thought my parents were clueless. They got a lot smarter as I got older. Sophie laughed. I love you, Dad. Maybe I'll visit you in Florida this winter. Mark hesitated. Well, I didn't tell you everything about my transfer, he admitted. The company bought a plant in Daytona Beach. That's where I am now. If you visit, I've got a spare room. There's a pool outside, and the ocean's just a few blocks away. Sophie gasped. You're kidding. If we'd known, Mom and I would have gone with you. Mark let that hang in the air. I guess you didn't want us there after everything that happened, she said quietly. You don't have to tell your mom, Mark added. But it's not a secret anymore. I'll email her my address so we can sort out the divorce by mail. I'm not coming back. Sophie was silent for a long moment. Are you going to divorce Mom? Mark's voice was steady. Yeah. Sophie exhaled. I understand. I warned her about Tony, but she thought you'd never find out. I just wish things were different. Me too, Mark said. Good night, Dad. I'll probably visit soon. That'd be great. Merry Christmas, Em. Just as Sophie hung up, Linda entered the room. Did I hear that right? She snapped. Your dad's not in Michigan? Where is he? Sophie didn't flinch. He's in Daytona Beach. Linda's eyes narrowed. Why did he lie? He didn't, Sophie corrected. He said he was transferred. That's true. We assumed it was Michigan. Linda's face twisted. He didn't tell us because he was at the motel when I called for the spare tire. He heard everything. That's why he didn't care what we thought. Why didn't he say anything then? Was he scared of Tony? Linda sneered. Sophie's patience snapped. Scared of Tony? Dad flattened him. Tony's no match for him, in a fight or as a husband. Stop trying to find flaws in Dad to justify what you did. Maybe don't treat your next husband the way you treated him. Linda's face paled. Next husband? Sophie crossed her arms. Yeah, Dad's divorcing you. Linda's voice cracked. He'll never go through with it. Not once he realizes I don't want a divorce. I don't even like Tony. This wouldn't have happened if he hadn't fallen down the stairs. Linda's words hung in the air, empty and defensive. Sophie's expression hardened. You still don't get it, do you? You were done the day I brought that spare tire to the motel. Dad saw everything. He knew exactly how little respect we had for him. You lied. You cheated. By Thanksgiving, you were already a walking divorce. Linda lowered her head. Tony's not to blame, she muttered. Sophie shook her head. Doesn't matter. You destroyed this all by yourself. Linda's voice cracked. I just want Mark back. The next day, things got worse. Mom got a letter from the health department, Sophie said when she called Mark later that afternoon. Tony tested positive for an STD while he was in the hospital. Mom has to get tested and list everyone she's been with. You're on that list. You'll probably get a letter soon. Mark exhaled sharply. Well, I should have seen that coming. I'll schedule a test today. Thanks for letting me know, Em. He made an appointment immediately, grateful that Deborah had insisted on protection. On the way home, he picked up several packs of condoms and tossed them into a bowl on his nightstand. No woman will get sick because of me, he promised himself. When his results came back clean, Mark felt an overwhelming sense of relief. As the weeks passed, his free time quickly filled with requests from the condo's single women for help around their homes. One evening, he mentioned this to Deborah over dinner. She laughed, swirling her wine. Yeah, I might have told a few friends how capable you are, in more ways than one. Mark raised an eyebrow. Word spreading, huh? Deborah smirked. Oh, you have no idea. Before long, Mark found himself regularly refilling the rubber bowl. Every woman who came over seemed to notice it, some even picking a few out with a teasing smile. One afternoon, just before Easter, Mark opened his door and froze. Sophie stood there, suitcase in hand. Her eyes filled with something he hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. Before he could speak, she threw her arms around him. I'm so sorry, Dad. Please forgive me. Can I stay for a few days? If you don't want me here, I'll go, she whispered. Mark hugged her back. I'm just surprised to see you. Of course, you can stay. You're always welcome here. As she stepped inside, he took a good look at her. You look more grown up. Sophie grinned, spinning around, finally filled out in the right places. She smirked. I'm the same bra size as Mom now, but it probably fits me better. She's gotten so skinny. Mark shook his head with a chuckle. Spring break? Yeah, she nodded. I hitched a ride with the Shirts. They're heading to Orlando, but dropped me off on the way. I'll be here for 4 days before heading back north. Sophie took in the apartment, her eyes bright with approval. This place is amazing. I bet you love living here. Mark smiled. It's smaller than the house, but it has everything I need, including a heated pool right outside. As she wandered into his bedroom, she stopped, raising an eyebrow at the bowl of condoms. Looks like you're getting everything you need, she teased. Good for you, Dad. You deserve some fun after everything. Mark rolled his eyes. All right. Let's just focus on your visit. Sophie laughed. I'll just soak up some sun while you're at work. The sun. I think I saw it once, maybe 2 summers ago. Mark chuckled. Tomorrow, we'll go out for dinner. There are some great spots around here. Ribs, steak, seafood. I'll take you to the place where the guys from work hang out. They'll be jealous when they see how beautiful my daughter is. Sophie grinned. Sounds perfect. The next evening, over ribs and beer, Mark and Sophie talked and laughed like old times. Then, Sophie's expression turned serious. Dad, why did you forgive me? She asked, her voice thick with emotion. If I were you, I don't think I could. Helping Mom cheat on you is awful. I hate myself for it, and I'm really sorry. Mark set down his fork and met her eyes. It's simple. I'm happier when you're around. Selfishly, that's enough for me. Being with you makes my life better, and I've learned to prioritize that. Sophie swallowed hard. I'm glad you feel that way. We've always been close, and it hurt knowing I pushed you away. After a pause, she asked hesitantly, Do you think you'll ever forgive Mom? Mark sighed. Sophie, your mother and I were partners. That meant honesty and trust. I don't trust her anymore. Sophie nodded. Figured. Especially after meeting your fan club at the pool. Mark raised an eyebrow. Fan club? Sophie smirked. It was very awkward having so many women ask me about you. From the way they talked, at least 4 of them are more than just friends. My dad, the condo Casanova. Mark chuckled. I don't know about all that. Oh, they love you, Sophie teased. They think you're this sensitive, honest, good-looking guy who's great in bed. She nudged him playfully. Mark shook his head with a laugh. I think they just like that I'm available. Sophie's smile faded slightly. Mom really messed up. Then, after a moment, she asked, Can I move in with you after I graduate? I want to find a summer job here and maybe go to college nearby. If I can't commute, can I at least spend weekends and holidays here? Things with Mom just aren't the same. Her betrayal hit me harder than I realized. Mark didn't hesitate. Of course. Watching Sophie grow into an independent young woman brought him real joy. He had no reason to say no. After she left for spring break, they spoke several times a week. Sophie insisted Mark skip her graduation, but promised she'd visit Florida the next day. On Sunday afternoon, Mark opened the door, expecting to see Sophie. Instead, it was Linda. Mark froze, momentarily unsure how to react. Linda looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes. For the first time in months, she seemed at a loss for words. Mark hesitated for only a second before stepping aside. Come in, Linda. His voice was neutral, unreadable. Can I get you something to drink? Thanks, Mark. I'd like that. Linda followed him into the kitchen, watching as he poured iced tea into 2 glasses. They sat across from each other, a silence stretching between them, thick with things left unsaid. Finally, Linda spoke. I was going to pick up Sophie, but she told me she's moving in with you. She exhaled, as if saying it out loud made it real. I transferred my job to Daytona. We need to figure out what to do with the house. You haven't filed for divorce yet, and we haven't really talked, so I don't know where you stand. Mark set his glass down. Why are you moving here? He studied her, genuinely surprised. What do you expect to happen? Linda's lips pressed together before she sighed. For starters, I'm done freezing every winter. Her voice was weak, uncertain. And with Sophie going to college here, I don't have much reason to stay up north. Just more gossip and judgment. She looked down at her hands. I don't know what Sophie told you, but your parents won't speak to me. Mine aren't much better. I've let a lot of people down, especially you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know what I did was unforgivable. She swallowed hard, then continued. I need a fresh start where people aren't whispering about me behind my back. And I'm just glad I didn't pass anything to you. Mark's expression didn't change, but something in her voice made him listen. I think you'd already stopped sleeping with me by the time Tony gifted me that lovely surprise, she muttered bitterly. I tried blaming everyone. Tony, the cashier, even the damn ladder he fell off. But it all comes back to me. I destroyed our marriage. I nearly ruined Sophie's relationship with you. She warned me about Tony, but I didn't listen. She paused, her voice softening. I'm grateful you let Sophie back into your life. Your love means everything to her. It meant everything to me before I lost my way. Now that I don't have it, I'd give anything to get it back. Mark leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. But that's not how this works, she admitted, nodding to herself. We should figure out what to sell and split the money. I thought you'd already filed for divorce. Mark raised an eyebrow. Isn't Tony single now? Linda scoffed. He is, but I don't care about him. Her eyes flashed. I might have been a fool, but I'm not dumb enough to divorce you for him. Mark took a sip of his tea. I thought you'd ended things after everything. I did, she said quietly. Mark exhaled. I'm pretty content with my life here. I hate change, and divorce is a big change. But yeah, we should probably talk about it now. Linda hesitated before admitting, I'd like to stay married, even though I know I don't deserve it. I always thought, he'll never find out. But you did. Mark studied her for a long moment. Where are you staying tonight? He finally asked. We've got time to sort things out over the next couple of weeks. I'll find a motel near Highway 95, Linda replied. It's close to the Home Depot where I'll be working. Sophie's out grocery shopping to give us time to talk, but she'll be back soon, so I should head out. Mark shrugged. Sophie's room has 2 beds. You can stay there if she's okay with it. Linda's brows lifted. Won't that be uncomfortable for you? Mark's expression didn't waver. I'll be fine if Sophie doesn't mind. We'll ask her when she gets back. Sophie had no issue with her mom staying in her room. Over the next few days, they all slipped into an odd rhythm, a version of the past stitched together with polite detachment. Mark steered clear of the pool and his usual crowd while Linda was around. No need to make things more uncomfortable than they already were. One evening, after Sophie left for a concert, Linda spoke up. Some of the women at the pool keep asking when I'm leaving, she said dryly. They've been talking about your big bowl of rubbers and which ones they like best. She smirked. Apparently, I've ruined their fun. Mark smirked. 4 women, Linda. Color me impressed. Her gaze sharpened. It's too bad I didn't leave that kind of impression on you before Tony showed up. Mark didn't hesitate. I'm not apologizing for enjoying myself. They're all single. They know the deal. I give as much as I get, and they're happy with it. Linda leaned in slightly. What about having some fun with me? Her voice was soft, almost uncertain. No strings attached. I feel like I owe you after everything I put you through. Mark chuckled. I'm not the same guy you remember, Linda. I'm more direct now. I tell these women exactly what I want, and they love it. No one stays more than a night. Her lips parted slightly. Then give me one night, she whispered. I can handle whatever you throw at me. I just want to make things right. Mark considered it. 10 minutes later, they were in his bed. Wow, Linda gasped afterward, breathless. That was incredible. You've definitely learned some new moves. Thank you, Mark said simply. As Linda carried her clothes back to Sophie's room, a voice called from down the hall. Could you keep it down next time? I'm trying to sleep. Sophie teased. Linda stayed through the summer, sleeping in Sophie's room but frequently sneaking into Mark's at night. She claimed he was the only man she'd ever want, and Mark nodded without making promises. But Linda wasn't oblivious. She counted the rubbers in his bowl, trying to gauge his other activities. She'd come home from work to fresh sheets and a few missing condoms, her attempts at exclusivity quietly undermined by Mark's reality. At the pool, the other women weren't outright rude, but the tension was there. Did you help Mark pick out that new blue bedding? Deborah Lawson asked one morning, her smile a little too knowing. It matches the curtains perfectly. Yes, great color, Tracy Evans chimed in. Very masculine, just like Mark. That night, Linda confronted him. You don't need those women, she pressed. I'll give you all the sex you want. Isn't that enough? Mark grinned. Exactly. I'll never need them again. Her eyes narrowed. Then why are there 2 fewer rubbers today? And why does everyone know what color your sheets are? Mark just smiled. I have no idea. That night, Mark sat on his balcony, whiskey in hand, staring out at the ocean. The scent of salt and the rhythmic crash of waves filled the humid air, a quiet reminder of how far he'd come. Linda was still lingering, hoping to reclaim what she lost. But Mark wasn't the same man anymore. He had spent years believing in a life that had crumbled beneath him. Now, he was free to build something new on his terms. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, then set it down. His phone buzzed. A message from Deborah? Drinks? Mark smiled and shook his head. For the first time in a long time, he didn't need distractions. He had peace. And that was enough.